Will, welcome to the Bitcoin Source. Can we start things off by you introducing yourself to the audience?
Hi, my name is Will Schoellkopf, author of The Bitcoin Dog, Following the Descent to the Bitcoin C++ Source Code, host of the Bitcoin podcast It's So Early. I'm published in print at Bitcoin Magazine and published online at Satoshi's Journal. And you can follow me at Real Bitcoin Dog on Twitter.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. So, Will, the first question that I usually ask people on the show, and I'm going to ask you now, is where did you source your Bitcoin knowledge from, whether it be books, courses, or even people in the ecosystem that kind of helped you to be a better Bitcoiner and break down your Bitcoin story?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I love the way you frame it, my Bitcoin story. Of course, that inspired me to publish my article of my Bitcoin story on Satoshi's Journal. It's my first time ever actually laying out how I came to Bitcoin, and it really gave me a chance to reflect and think deeply on, what was my journey in particular. Thinking back, my very first source was financial news, so just objective financial news. In particular, last year, in early 2021, or actually late 2020 even, when Bitcoin broke above $20,000 for the first time ever, all-time high, that really caught my eye. And then a couple months later, seeing the financial headline that Tesla had bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, that was really the first time it made me stop to think, could I be wrong about Bitcoin? As an investor, there's so many things I try to be right about, and it's hard to be humbling, to humble yourself to think, wow, at this point everyone's heard about Bitcoin, kind of made a judgment call on it, but for me to think, could I be wrong about Bitcoin? That was a really humbling experience. So then I dug deeper as an investor, looking at investment studies from financial institutions I trusted. In particular, Fidelity published a Bitcoin investment thesis. Cathie Wood's ARK published her Big Ideas of 2021, which included Bitcoin. And Grayscale, who offers the GBTC product, published a Bitcoin 2019 investor study. That was actually so interesting to me that ultimately in my book, The Bitcoin Dog, and my dedication, I dedicated my book to the 89% listed in Grayscale's investor study who said they would have invested in Bitcoin if they just knew a little more. So, I found that just absolutely fascinating. Then, of course, the software engineer in me, don't trust, verify. I like to start with primary sources. So I went straight to the Bitcoin white paper. And even as a software engineer, it was pretty tough for me to understand it. I think that's a common experience for most people, but I did go straight to the white paper right away. I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of myths or misconceptions about Bitcoin out there. So for me, so grateful is just so accessible, that PDF, to see, from the source, from Satoshi Nakamoto, what is Bitcoin supposed to be. And then I pressed further, again, in that theme of looking at hard news. I listened to Bitcoin news podcasts. In particular, CoinDesk has a podcast called The Breakdown with NLW, and he talks about Bitcoin. He frames it like it's about Bitcoin, macro, and the power shifts reshaping our world. So really thinking of Bitcoin as a bigger idea in the world overall, and just where Bitcoin news breaks on a global level. Then, of course, I had to read a book to explain Bitcoin. So going to a Bitcoin book. Of course, what was the book? The Bitcoin Standard. I still, recommend that book greatly to everyone. And then, Dadu, I think it's interesting that you mentioned coursework, if there was any coursework I took. And in a sense, there was. My one friend, of course, had recommended Bitcoin to me early on, and I brushed him off. But then later at this point, after going a little deeper down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I now had multiple friends invested in Bitcoin. They encouraged me to self-custody in a hardware wallet. They had a Ledger, so they recommended Ledger. And I was very nervous, very afraid I don't want to lose my Bitcoin. So Ledger, on their website, they have what's called a Ledger Academy with courses to learn all about blockchain, crypto, but in particular Bitcoin. And there I learned all about what a seed phrase is, you know, a 24-word seed phrase, how to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. And ironically, it was all of Ledger's courses about the other cryptos and how to stake your crypto to generate yield that ultimately turned me off from all of the other altcoins. Those all screamed like a scam to me for sure. And I could tell Bitcoin was different. So, you know, I'm still grateful for Ledger for their coursework to ironically actually steer me away from the altcoins, keep me focused on Bitcoin. That led me to not just the Bitcoin Standard, but then more technical Bitcoin books. Andreas Antonopoulos, I read his book Mastering Bitcoin, which was great for me as a software engineer to learn, you know, fundamentally how does Bitcoin work. I was turned on to Andreas's videos. In particular, he has an amazing one called Rules Without Rulers, which was just such a fascinating concept to me, how you can have rules, but they're not enforced by any rulers, and how that works in Bitcoin. But still, I had yet to make purchase on my first amount to Bitcoin. And that's where I think of my final source. What was the final trigger for me to finally purchase my first sliver of Bitcoin? And that was a Bitcoin cultural article. It was published in Citadel 21 by Croesus, and it was called Why the Yuppie Elite Dismiss Bitcoin. And it was deriding them, the yuppie elite, because they are very proud of their outside of the box thinking, which ironically just means thinking inside the box. And, you know, they've done well as investors. You know, they've followed the heuristics. They stay away from the red flags. But that's the thing. If they go past the red flags of Bitcoin to learn more, they can really see how Bitcoin actually is different. And so after all of my research, you know, that cultural piece finally made me, okay, I'm ready to buy Bitcoin. And so I purchased my first sliver of Bitcoin in April 2021 at $62,000, which is the most I've ever paid for Bitcoin. And I've just been buying the dip ever since. So proud class of 2021. It'll be a long time, maybe, before Bitcoin's back up above that price again. But my conviction is higher than ever. And yeah, so I was just grateful to really reflect on how I came to Bitcoin. The greatest takeaway is, as you heard that story, Dadu, not once did I mention Twitter. So for as active as you are on Bitcoin Twitter, or I am on Bitcoin Twitter, if I really wanted to think about where I could make the greatest impact of turning no-coiners into Bitcoiners, having that perspective, it wasn't Twitter. That was not the source. So I'm very grateful for Twitter, making that community, expanding that body of knowledge, you know, making those networking and those connections. But it's ultimately the Bitcoin education work, the financial news reporting, you know, the kind of stuff produced by Satoshi's journal that I think is what helps bring no-coiners into Bitcoiners.
Absolutely. And that was a great take on how you kind of approach Bitcoin, your story, all the, you know, wide ranges of information, books, courses. And even for courses, a lot of people don't mention courses. Like, for example, for myself, Michael Saylor has Saylor.org, which is a free educational site, which he promotes. And he has a course called Bitcoin for Everybody. And I think a lot of people could utilize that course, especially if they're now coming into the space or they're new to Bitcoin. That'll be something that'll be helpful. And thank you, Will, for, you know, kind of bringing to light Ledger's educational courses, because I'm going to check that out now. I never heard of it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I just forgot. You know, thinking about coursework, I took like, oh yeah, a course, you know, and it's easy to mistake coursework for just a series of articles, but it's not necessarily just a series of articles. These are, you know, building blocks. 101. You know, this concept leads to this. Concept leads to this. You know, read on. You know, the next article, and yeah. So I'm grateful for the hardware wallets themselves for generating coursework, and yeah, it's grateful for Saylor's coursework. I think for Saylor also, I think he was generating courses long before Bitcoin, so he has a history of seeing value in generating coursework to educate others. There's something about a course that actually gives a feeling of accomplishment once it's reached past the end, and the structure, I think, can really help someone with getting started.
100%. I agree with that. And Will, I want to get into your book, The Bitcoin Dog. But before doing that, I actually found something out very insightful about you, which is you kind of run your own nodes and you really kind of build on, the Lightning Network as an engineer and doing things with privacy and keeping your Bitcoin, off of the KYC type of model where your transactions can be kind of approved and verified on your own. Because as we know, as Bitcoiners, we don't trust, we always verify. So my next question is, what is a Bitcoin node and what is the difference between a node and mining Bitcoin?
Great question. I get that question a lot from my family and friends because I'm so proud to show off to them my Bitcoin node. And their first question is, oh, so does this make you money? And I say, no, it does not make me money. It does not make me any money. And then they follow up with, well, so why do it? Why run a node if it doesn't make you money? But this is what it means to be a global citizen in the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network. For the network to be decentralized means that all of us Bitcoiners ultimately run our own nodes. So Bitcoin miners, of course, run nodes because they want to broadcast their blocks to be appended in the blockchain. All the exchanges that do KYC, they all run their own Bitcoin nodes because that's how they pass Bitcoin, on to their customers and between their customers. But it's you and me, Dadu. If I have a Bitcoin node and you have a Bitcoin node, and I want to send you Bitcoin, you and I can do it directly with our Bitcoin nodes. We don't need to use Strike or Cash App. We don't need to use Coinbase. More than that, if you have a hardware wallet, like a cold card, for example, or something, or a Ledger or a Trezor, you don't need to use the Ledger Live software to send me Bitcoin or the Trezor Suite software to send me Bitcoin. You can use your Bitcoin Core node, your Bitcoin Core wallet. You can upload, you can sign transactions in an air-gapped way and broadcast them directly from your node. So that way, nobody necessarily knows where the transaction came from, where it was broadcast from, who's keeping track of it. You're totally independent. So while Ledger was my first hardware wallet, I did see a study that said Ledger's pitch to investors to invest in the Ledger company is they keep track of every single XPub from every single Ledger hardware wallet to show off how many millions of Bitcoin are being stored on people's ledgers. Granted, your Bitcoin is still cryptographically secure. Your seed phrase is still, secure on the chip. I don't believe Ledger has a backdoor or anything like that. But having your own Bitcoin node helps keep your self-sovereignty, so you're not another company's statistic.
And speaking of that, Will, I actually saw, because, we see all this craziness now going on with Casa and some of these other multi-sig self-custody companies. And someone from Ledger kind of chimed in on Twitter and talked about, is there a backdoor? Why are you not, showing this or showing that? And he actually put an article on Twitter talking about exactly what you were saying, where you can transact with your own node through Ledger or through Trezor or whatever, hardware wallet company you want to use. And then you can kind of circumvent having to use their node to kind of verify your transactions, which kind of opens the door for nefarious actors to, it still would be difficult, but I guess if they really did their homework, they probably could try to find and connect your public key to whatever node that you're running. And I think that running your own node kind of avoids all that nonsense by just doing it yourself and not relying on a third party to run that node and verify those transactions. So what you said made perfect sense there.
Yeah, Dadu, and I'll tell you something that I haven't said publicly yet. Like any good Bitcoiner, I've been keeping my own pen and paper ledger of all of my Bitcoin transactions, all of my UTXOs, everything I've spent and unspent. I'm very grateful for Ledger. They're available at Best Buy. Any person can just get started quickly. They're plentifully available. Like I said, their marketing is really high, and they have the Ledger Academy and stuff. But ultimately, I would prefer a Bitcoin only company to a company that supports other cryptocurrencies. You mentioned Casa before, but my Ledger Live software a few weeks ago all of a sudden showed as if my Bitcoin balance was less than it should be, which was shocking to me. So, thank goodness I had my Bitcoin node, my actual node, to query one of my Bitcoin addresses to see, well, what is the UTXO for my Bitcoin address? And sure enough, for some reason, for my seed phrase on my ledger and my ledger live, it was for these two Bitcoin addresses, it wasn't showing the UTXO balance. So it was as if, like, once I had sent all my funds, it was as if I had zero balance, even though two more Bitcoin addresses, we're really getting low level here, but it was as if two UTXO addresses of my seed phrase had no more Bitcoin on them. But I loaded that seed phrase into a cold card wallet and connected that to Sparrow, which is another wallet software. And sure enough, using Sparrow, don't trust verify, using my Sparrow wallet, there's two UTXO addresses that have unspent Bitcoin. And I was able to do a partially signed Bitcoin transaction to then move those Bitcoin somewhere else. But yeah, it was just fascinating. I had never seen a critical error like that before where, oh my gosh, my Ledger Live software was telling me that there was no more Bitcoin associated with this seed phrase when actually there was. And I'm grateful to have my own Bitcoin node to verify for myself, what was on the blockchain.
For the audience out there, that might have been like a super technical answer. I understood everything Will was saying, but if you're a newbie, that was kind of like maybe over your head. But as time goes on and you gain experience, you'll understand what Will was talking about. But Will, what I really want to get into now is your book, because I know you wrote your own Bitcoin book. And what inspired you to write your book, The Bitcoin Dog?
It is. It just fell down before. Getting into my Bitcoin story again, I was hooked. I couldn't stop reading about Bitcoin. I was just reading absolutely everything I could find about Bitcoin. And ultimately, my loving and supporting wife, I was driving her crazy, just constantly talking about Bitcoin all the time. And I was out of things to read. And, what else is there to read about Bitcoin? And then I remembered, Bitcoin's supposed to be open source. Let me just see if I can go to the Bitcoin Core GitHub and read the Bitcoin code for myself. Like, let me read in the code for myself where there's a variable that says, it's defined to a 21 million limit. And then I was shocked to look in the code and see that's actually not written anywhere. There's nowhere in the code that says the limit is 21 million, change this variable. It's actually a mathematical formula that ultimately evaluates to a value of 21 million. And that was so cool and so exciting to me. And I went back to those original Bitcoin friends because I wanted to show them the C++ code. But then I found it was too premature. I couldn't just go straight to my Bitcoiner friends to show them the C++ code because they still needed to know how the Bitcoin game theory mining algorithm worked in the first place. They know mining exists, but they didn't know exactly how it worked. So they needed to know a little more about how miners include transactions in blocks and how the halving mechanism takes place. And then maybe there'd be a chance they could, listen to me and try to see how the C++ code works. So for an inspiration to try to inspire my friends, to share my excitement of hearing about the code, and to spare my wife from just hearing me go on and on about how amazing Bitcoin is, like any respectable husband, I channeled all of that energy into writing my own Bitcoin book. And, of course, I'll write it about my Australian cattle dog, Sheila, running around the Australian outback, talking to all these other Aussie animals to learn about Bitcoin.
I know how it is. A lot of times you just, you start talking about Bitcoin and then you fall down the rabbit hole. And then next thing you know, like you want everybody to know and understand what Bitcoin is and why it's important.
Even talking to you right now, I accidentally start getting into UTXO management. And it's like, oh gosh, what am I doing? I gotta catch myself. But yeah, that's for the true Bitcoiners out there to know. Don't trust, verify. I mean, all the way down. Yep.
And we'll kind of get back into like Bitcoin node conversations, and this might be for more experienced people, but it's kind of a question I have, for you personally. And while running a node, there's different types of nodes out there, right? There's Bitcoin nodes, there's Lightning nodes. And the question that I really wanted to know was, the difference between the two, which is, are you running a full node or are you running a light node?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dadu. So I am running a Bitcoin full node. And as far as I can tell, There's 3 different names for a Bitcoin node, and all of these are separate from a Lightning Network node. So for a Bitcoin full node means that you have either a solid state drive or a hard disk drive, in your laptop or attached to your Raspberry Pi, or you purchased from a company that sells nodes. There's some great companies out there that sell Bitcoin nodes already done. But the intent is you're storing a full copy of the blockchain. So on average, every Bitcoin block is about 1 megabyte. On average, every block is produced, or 1 block is produced every 10 minutes. And this all started on January 3rd, 2009. I think the current size of the Bitcoin blockchain is getting close to a size of 500 gigabytes. And you are storing every single Bitcoin block. So if someone wanted to send you Bitcoin, so Dadu, if you wanted to send me Bitcoin, I could verify that the Bitcoin you have is yours, because I can reference that UTXO unspent transaction to what previous block it came from and which block that one previously came from, and keep going back and back all the way until the very beginning, all the way until the Satoshi mined the Genesis block from the beginning. And that's a really powerful thing, because when you send me Bitcoin, I want to be sure that you're not double spending, which is the concept of you sending me Bitcoin that you actually already sent to someone else. So there is something called a pruned node. So this would be maybe the second category from a full node. There's quite a few addresses on the Bitcoin blockchain that have no more Bitcoin in them. So maybe at some point they had Bitcoin, but now they don't have any Bitcoin anymore. And so because they don't have any Bitcoin anymore, we don't need to worry that they're going to go double spend, that they're going to go spend Bitcoin they don't have, because their balance is 0. So a pruned node means you go out a way to save disk space and just get rid of all of those addresses. If one day later those addresses suddenly have some Bitcoin, they'll come back on. It's kind of like a halfway measure to try to have a full node. But of course, I would recommend just having a full Bitcoin node if you can. If you're going to go through the hassle of having a Bitcoin node, have a full one. The final one is called a light node, which I think is what you're referring to. A light node is really just a Bitcoin wallet. So you have an ability to create Bitcoin transactions, broadcast transactions, receive transactions from others, but you're trusting someone else's Bitcoin node. You ultimately need a Bitcoin full node to connect to send your transaction or receive transaction. So it's still great because you're running it yourself. It's not necessarily software you downloaded, or it's not a proprietary software from someone else like Ledger Live or Trezor Suite. It is your Bitcoin Light node, but you're still ultimately trusting someone else's Bitcoin node to connect to.
One of the biggest things that people face, especially in society when it comes to finances or even just securing your wealth or store of value, is convenience, right? And I think that, running a node, it's like inconvenient for some people, but if you're really technical or you really believe in the protocol, you will understand that this is a part of the decentralization process, and this is what keeps the network kind of free from, nefarious actors or people doing things wonky with the protocol with your money. So I think that, breaking down the different types of nodes will be beneficial to some people in the industry that might look at this interview and say like, hey, like, what is a node and what is this conversation between a light node and a full node? And I agree with you, Will, where like I think the new nodes out there now have like 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of disk space. So there's plenty of space for you to kind of download the full blockchain network, and so you can see every transaction if you choose to. And I just think that it's really helpful for Bitcoiners to run a node so that you can really be your own bank and secure and verify your own transactions, where you don't have like to second guess if things are legitimate or not.
Yeah, I'll say 2 things in particular. First of all, this is the Bitcoin innovation to become a sovereign individual. It's not Wells Fargo or JP Morgan. You're not logging in with a username and password and then logging into some other service to see your balance. And I'm sure people have had the experience before where they go to check their checking account and the balance isn't what they expect it to be. And like, oh gosh, what happened here? Where's this customer service number to call? When you run your own Bitcoin node, there is no service to log into. There's no email address or password to provide. The reason, it's permissionless. And there's no customer service number, which can be a little scary for some. If you buy your Bitcoin node from someone else, sure, but your Bitcoin node is your node, you control it. And the other thing, when it comes to downloading the Bitcoin blockchain, the initial block download, it's not actually the case like there's a button you click like, okay, please download 500 gigabytes of data. No, your Bitcoin node is connecting to the peer-to-peer network. It's requesting to receive one block at a time from each other node. And each block your node receives, it's running code against it to verify all of the transactions. So if any of the other Bitcoin peers try to send you a Bitcoin block that doesn't make sense, that says an address has more Bitcoin in it that it doesn't have, it will reject that block. So that's part of what makes the initial block download take so long, is you're not just downloading 500 gigabytes of blocks from someone else. You're going one block at a time, verifying every single block along the way. So by the time it's finished, you know that you didn't trust anybody. Your copy of the Bitcoin blockchain is verified.
Exactly. And that kind of answered my last question, which was, privacy and the KYC aspect. But there was something that you did say, Will, that I want people to know about, where, for example, let's say you buy an Umbrel or you buy like a Raspberry Pi, your own node. When you first connect that node and set it up, it's going to take some time for all those blocks to kind of be verified and put in. So sometimes people set up a Bitcoin node and they're like, why is this taking so long? This is taking like hours for this to set up and run. It's because what Will said, it's verifying and transacting all those blocks from, I believe, 2009 or 2008 when the first Genesis block came out. And it takes time to just verify and, accumulate all those different blocks so that you can go back whenever you choose, 2011, 12, 13, 14, and see whatever transaction was out there. You can go and verify it for yourself and not rely on a third party like a Wells Fargo. Like, you can't call Bank of America and say, hey, when did I transfer or deposit some money 7 years ago? They'd look at you like, what are you talking about? But you can do that in the Bitcoin protocol. So thank you for that breakdown.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My big pet thing is, with the legacy financial system, is you can go to do a bank transfer. You can go to send someone money, or they can go to send you money. And then you're just stuck wondering, 2 business days, like, so did I really send, or did they start the send to me? I have no idea. But with the Bitcoin blockchain, no, it's like, I see it right there on my copy of the blockchain. Here's the address. I know whether or not you've sent me my money. Where's my money? Like, where's it? There's my address. You said you sent me the Bitcoin. I don't see it. Like, what's going on? Where's my money? I mean, it's just this amazing power that someone can't like tell you, oh, it's on its way. I sent it. Should be a couple of business days. Like, no, is it confirmed on the blockchain? You haven't sent me anything. I'm still waiting. So that's an unbelievable, powerful innovation. I would say for the hardcore Bitcoiners, the reason they run their own Bitcoin node is, as you say, for privacy. But ultimately, for people who aren't necessarily tech savvy, I would say the biggest reason for them to run their own node is it will increase your conviction in Bitcoin. Bear markets are for builders. As the asset price of Bitcoin goes down, the network only gets stronger. More Bitcoin nodes come online. It gets easier to run your own Bitcoin node. It becomes more peer-to-peer. This global network. This is the concept. If the internet went out in America, I know all the Bitcoin nodes in Nigeria would still be running. If the internet went out in Nigeria, I know all the nodes in America would be running. If the internet went out in both countries, I know Blockstream has already launched satellites into outer space to beam transactions and Bitcoin blocks down. I think his name's the Sultan or something in Venezuela has a Bitcoin node running to receive Bitcoin blocks, from Blockstream satellites, and even though he gets the blocks beamed down to him from space, he still doesn't trust them. He still verifies them, make sure Adam Beck is sending actual valid Bitcoin blocks. So, otherwise his Bitcoin node will reject them. So it's truly incredible. And that's the biggest reason to think, wow, you can do this. And also when you run your own Bitcoin node, it's always humbling. You think, wow, if I can do this, maybe anyone could do this. So.
Some Bitcoiners have become so spoiled where if you're transacting on the layer 1 protocol, which is the base layer, if you have if a transaction, if I send you some money, it takes 10 minutes, they complain and say that takes too long. But now you can use the Lightning Network and get it a lot faster. But that kind of comes with time where people complain about that, but you'll wait 5 to 7 business days to get a substantial amount of money from a third party. So when it comes to Bitcoin, you can verify that your money is coming peer to peer, in a faster process where you're not dealing with all these delays and fees and people kind of like picking apart at your money. If I send you $1,000 in Bitcoin, you're getting $1,000, not $989 and some change. So yeah.
and one more thing, the Bitcoin node passes the family member test because it can be as small and as quiet as a Raspberry Pi. Yep. Much unlike a miner, which takes a lot more convincing to run such a loud and noisy and power consumption thing. So it's a great way to participate in the Bitcoin network, help the Bitcoin network, and have everyone else in the house still be happy.
Exactly. And if you have a router in your house, you might as well have a Bitcoin node as well. You can connect it right to your router and just place it in the same area. Perfect.
Yeah, you got it.
Yep. Well, Will, this Bitcoin conversation was great. I learned a lot. I hope a lot of people learned about Bitcoin nodes and why they're important for Bitcoiners and people that want to be sovereign individuals. So could you give people your social media handles and any future endeavors that you might want people to know about?
My Twitter handle is realbitcoindog. And if you go to my website, realbitcoindog.com, I have an email newsletter you can subscribe to if you're not on Twitter. And of course, Dadu, you mentioned Lightning. Other than buying my book on Amazon, The Bitcoin Dog, you can also go to the website bitcoindogbook.com. It's a way to read my book online and pay as you enjoy to read it chapter by chapter, paying with Bitcoin. I just published an article on how that architecture works on Satoshi's journal. And if you don't have to own any Bitcoin to get started, you can even buy $15 worth of Bitcoin with a credit card and then start paying with Bitcoin that way. And hey, now you own Bitcoin, which, as Dadu said, you can then send over the Lightning Network to any Lightning wallet. So it's a great user-friendly way to have fun playing with Bitcoin.
Most definitely. Well, thank you for this Bitcoin conversation. It's been super insightful and helpful. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you, Dadu.